In construction, it's easy to focus on adding tools to our belt, learning new skills, getting better at what we do. But what if I told you that that's only half the equation? What if the real game changer isn't adding more tools, but upgrading the person wearing the tool belt? My guest today is Ryan Gottfredson, and he's got this framework that's really challenging. He talks about vertical development versus horizontal development. And most of us have been doing horizontal development throughout our careers without even knowing that there was another way. Ryan's going to break down Jim Collins's Level 5 leadership model and explain why only 8% of executives actually operate at the highest level. And trust me, this isn't some fluffy leadership theory. We're talking about your nervous system, how you respond under pressure, and whether you're wired for self-protection or value creation. Now, during the conversation, I pushed back on Ryan throughout because, to be honest, some of this stuff sounds a little too neat and tidy for the messy reality of leadership. But what comes out of this discussion is some real gold, practical strategies for staying cool when the heat's on, and understanding what your real motives are when you're making decisions. All right, let's go deep with Ryan on what it actually means to develop as a leader. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Ryan, welcome to Construction Genius.
Hey, thanks for having me on, and thanks for creating this great platform for people like me to come on and share hopefully some cutting edge and thoughtful ideas.
Yeah, awesome to have you here. I'd like to dive right in. You have a concept that you've developed that you use in your practice of vertical development versus horizontal development. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, here's what's interesting about it, right? When you think about our development efforts, you think about our education experiences, our athletic programs, and most of our organizational development efforts are largely what I'm going to call horizontal development. Horizontal development is a term that's used to kind of connote the idea of improving in our knowledge, our skills, and our abilities. And oftentimes when we are starting off in our careers, this is what we need. So there's nothing wrong with horizontal development. But horizontal development has some limitations because horizontal development is like adding tools on our tool belt. And it's great to have tools, but only as long as we could use them effectively. But there's a different form of development that's called vertical development. Vertical development isn't about adding tools on our tool belt. It's about upgrading the person wearing the tool belt so that we could better employ the tools that we have on our tool belt. So the technical definition of vertical development is development that is designed to help us upgrade our body's internal operating system so that we could operate under stress, pressure, complexity, and uncertainty in more effective ways.
Why do you use the word body there?
Well, vertical development, right? When we think about horizontal development, it's very cognitive. But when you think about upgrading our body's internal operating system, really what we're talking about is our nervous system. And our nervous system is throughout our body. So I'm sure that if you're listening to this, you've had a manager, let's say, that is very reactive or a micromanager. And when people are more reactive, more of a micromanager, what they actually have a hard time with is sitting with uncertainty, sitting with stress, sitting with pressure. And that has much more to do about their body's nervous system than it does their knowledge, skills, and abilities.
What is the relationship then between, because someone might listen to this, right, and they may have a certain response in a certain situation. Let's say they're in a pressure or a stress situation and they feel a certain way, and their perspective is, I have no control over that feeling. It just comes upon me. Is that a true statement? And it's just a matter of processing then the feeling? Or are you saying by upgrading your nervous system, the feelings can change in response to the stimulus that comes in.
Exactly the latter. Our feelings can change depending upon the stimulus that come in. So the idea being is as we vertically develop, what we're doing is we're becoming more mature, right? So when we're maybe younger, less developed, then we might be more reactive in a certain circumstance. But as we develop in our maturity and in our sophistication, we can experience that same circumstance, but handle it at a much higher and much more elevated level. In fact, let me bring up a framework that might be helpful, because what I'm suggesting is that individuals vary in their vertical development altitude. Some leaders are very low in their vertical development altitude and other leaders are very high. And a common framework that is utilized to kind of help us understand that comes from Jim Collins's famous book, Good to Great. And he talks about it as level 5 leadership.
Let me interrupt you. Just before you get there, I'd like to go back to this word mature.
Yeah.
What do you mean by mature?
So generally, when you think about an individual being mature, it's when it comes to our internal operating system, it means that one is more regulated. So one can experience problems, stress, mistakes, pressure without becoming overcome by those types of things. So some people who are less mature, they really kind of wilt under those conditions. But people who have a more mature and regulated internal operating system, they have a much greater, or they're much more effective at navigating those difficult, kind of trying circumstances in the moment of those circumstances.
So what would you say to someone who says, well, I have a certain way of responding under pressure and it works for me? And they define works by whatever it means. Some people, they find it tremendously strategically or tactically effective to blow their top in a pressure situation because it gets them what they want. And when you look at someone behaving like that, you might say that person is being immature, and yet it's effective. So, and we all know bosses who are like that.
Yep.
How do you respond to someone as they're thinking through this sort of idea?
Yeah, that surely feels right to them, and that's why they do it. But from an outsider perspective, it kind of leaves you scratching your head thinking, I'm not sure that was the best method to lead in this circumstance. And so I think it's also helpful when we think about our vertical altitude. People who are lower in their vertical altitude, their bodies are more wired for self-protection in the moment. People who are higher on their vertical altitude, their bodies are more wired for value creation. So let me give you a quick example. So let's say we have a leader, and on this particular day, a subordinate comes to the leader and says, hey, I've got this new idea for doing this, doing X, Y, and Z. If that leader is more wired for self-protection, they might immediately dismiss those ideas. No, that's not the way that we do things. We do them this way. And the reason why the leader does that, shuts down this employee's ideas, is because that leader is wired to want to feel safe and secure. And these new ideas that are coming forward are causing that leader to feel unsettled about their current approach. So as a way to help protect them and protect their emotions in the moment, they shut down the employee's ideas. And that's going to feel good to the leader in the short term. But inherently, what that does is it prevents the leader from creating value in the long term. Because chances are there's probably some really good golden nuggets in that employee's ideas. And so a more mature leader, a more vertically developed leader, when those ideas come forward, even if that leader doesn't immediately agree, they're willing to sit with that discomfort in the short term as a way to try to learn, grow, and improve in the long term to be able to create the greater value in the long term. So hopefully that's a decent example to kind of demonstrate how people can be wired more for self-protection versus more for value creation. And the leaders who are more reactive, kind of in the example you brought forward, that would be a signal that they're more wired for self-protection.
So when is it appropriate for a leader to demonstrate emotion, raise their voice, say, no, you're wrong, that's a bad idea?
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with bringing forward emotion. In fact, I think we need more of that from leaders, particularly male leaders. We need more emotion. Now, that emotion needs
What do
to
you
be
mean by emotion in a male leader? What does that mean?
well, it means part of it is there's the positive emotions and there's negative emotions. But also something that I've found in my research working with leaders is one of the things that male leaders struggle the most with is with being vulnerable, right? When we're vulnerable, that is something that leads to short-term discomfort. So when we lack vulnerability, that's a self-protective strategy, but not necessarily a value creating strategy. So I think we need more emotions, but we also need to ask the question, what is the purpose of our emotions? Is the bringing forward our emotions a way to protect myself and help me feel more settled and secure? Or is me bringing forward my emotions in an effort to bring about greater value for the people that we're leading and the customers that we're serving?
Okay, so that's a very good framework right there. So that's interesting, right? To think about, is this expression of emotion serving myself or serving others? I guess that's the way to frame it in a simple way. Is that right?
Yeah, spot on. Yep. So the emotions aren't bad. It's the motives behind that emotion, for sure.
How can one know what their motives really are?
Yeah, and that's what's tricky, right? Because it requires that leader have a certain level of metacognitive skills. And what
What
I
is
mean
that?
by that,
Those are big words. What does metacognitive skill mean?
yeah, so it's this capacity to kind of step away from ourselves and view ourselves. So one of the ways that I've heard it say is we could see ourselves as the actor on stage, or we could be the person in the balcony that's viewing the actor. And most of the time, we are kind of the actor on stage. It's what's right in front of us that we're responding to. But what it requires, metacognition, is taking this ability as we're going to put ourselves on the balcony and kind of view how we're operating and inspect the motives that are going on there. So that's one of the skills that we develop as we vertically develop, is this capacity to be more mindful and more conscious of who we are and how we're presenting ourselves.
Okay, so you call it a skill. So that implies that it's something that can be learned and developed. And you began to introduce that level 5 leadership concept, which Jim Collins first introduced. Tell us a little bit more then about what the skill actually is and how to develop it.
Yeah, you're right. So metacognition is something where people will vary in their ability to do that. And it is something we could regularly improve upon. Now, there's a variety of different tactics under which we can improve our metacognitive abilities. Oftentimes, meditation is seen as one of the primary habits that one could exercise to be able to develop those skills. But it's also helpful to have tools or coaches to help us in that process. So another kind of tool that we can use is we could do journaling, right? And do some after action reviews. And the more that we get used to doing that, we develop a greater capacity to be present and mindful in the moment in which the actions or the stress or the pressure is taking place.
Okay, so you introduced their meditation, you introduced journaling. I'm a construction leader. I don't meditate and I'm too busy to journal. What now?
Well, here's what's interesting, right? We need to build the why. Why should we do stuff like this? And these aren't the only things that we can do. And that's what gets us into Jim Collins's level 5 leadership framework. Okay. So Jim Collins, in his research associated with Good to Great, while he calls it level 5, it's really the top 3 levels of his framework are leadership positions. And what he's effectively found is that leaders operate or can operate at different levels of maturity and sophistication. And those that operate at, I'll use his terminology, level 3 are less sophisticated and less mature. Level 4 is a moderate level of maturity and sophistication. And then level 5 is the highest levels of maturity and sophistication. What he's found in his research is that it's level 5 leaders that have a transformative effect on the groups and the organizations that they lead. Or let me state it this way. What he's learned is that the maturity and sophistication of a leader sets the ceiling for the effectiveness of the groups or organizations that they lead. And if we understand that, then it becomes worthwhile to ask the question, well, what level do I operate from? And what research has found on this is that if we look at just executives in businesses, we find that 7% of leaders operate at that level 3 level, at the low level. 85% operate at that moderate level, and only 8% operate at that highest level.
Okay, so do me a favor and give me a very clear definition or a simple, straightforward definition of each level.
Yeah.
Of those 3 levels.
Yeah. At each level, our bodies are programmed to fulfill different needs. So at that level 3 level, our bodies are primarily focused on safety, comfort, and belonging. And when we're focused on safety, comfort, and belonging, we become dependent thinkers. We kind of rely on others to tell us what to do. And we also try to kind of be more people-pleasing and more focused on avoiding bad things from happening.
Okay, that's excellent. Give me the next level, please.
So that's level 3. Level 4, now our body's needs are going to change. We are no longer worried about safety, comfort, and belonging. We're worried about standing out, advancing, and getting ahead. So now we make this shift from being a dependent thinker to being an independent thinker. We develop our own set of good ideas, and we want to put those to the test. And generally, our focus is on short-term goals, outcomes, and rewards. Kind of essentially what we're incentivized to do. We want to do that to the very best of our ability, particularly in the short term. So we're doing a lot of measurement and comparison. How do I stack up relative to my peers? How can I win this next race or win this next battle is kind of the mentality of these leaders.
Okay, let's go to level 5.
Then level 5, at this level, we're not concerned about standing in and we're not concerned about standing out. Our bodies now are wired to fulfill the needs to contribute, add value, and lift others. And when we get to this place, we're now much more concerned about a long-term purpose as opposed to short-term outcomes. And as we make this shift up to this level 5 level, we've gone from a dependent thinker to an independent thinker to now to being an interdependent thinker. And as we make this shift up here, what we're doing is we're expanding our maturity and our sophistication, which allows us at this top level to lead effectively despite having pressure, stress, uncertainty, and complexity in the world around us. And again, like I said, what research has found is that only 8% of leaders operate at this level.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. Over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview.
So when you lay out this framework, you're obviously categorizing folks, which is helpful in a way, but don't we all at some point kind of bounce between these levels that you're describing?
Yeah, you're spot on. So one of the things that's helpful to consider, so it's one, when we have this framework, it gets us to ask and answer a question that most people never ask, which is, what is my vertical altitude? And this framework allows us to start to step into this and kind of introspect about our current level. But to your point, is there some nuance to it? So let me give you another question that we can consider. rather than think about what is my vertical altitude, we can ask the question, what is my center of gravity? Because to your point is, I think we could find ourselves operating at any of these three levels. And I know I see that in myself. But what the research has found is that we tend to gravitate towards one of these levels, particularly under stress and pressure. And so when we ask the question, what is my center of gravity? We open up the door to think, what is the percentage of time that I spend in each of these levels? And then the takeaway, of course, is how can I spend a greater percentage of my time at that level 5 level?
Why is it that one would want to spend their time at the level 5 level?
Well, at the end of the day, when we're at that level, that's when we can have the greatest and most positive transformative effect on the people that we lead and then the clients that we serve. And so when we look back at kind of the course of history, when we can identify...
Let me just ask one thing, right?
Yeah.
You say transformative effect. What is that transformative effect that you're looking to affect?
Well, I think that depends on the purpose, right?
Okay.
That we're trying to serve. So, right, when we look back at great stereotypical leaders, and we can think about historical leaders like Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, right? These are leaders who have had transformative effects on society at large. And we would generally classify them as being these level 5 leaders.
Would you really?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because, you think of someone like Churchill, right? And Churchill, on the one hand, was level 5 quite a bit. But on the other hand, he was really into his comfort, very much into his ease. And so it's just interesting. Again, you bring up Martin Luther King, and one might say, I'm not sure how often he was functioning at level 5 based on some of the documents that have been released lately, if you know what I mean. So again, I'm not trying to disparage these people, but I'm just pushing back on this idea because it seems like what you're saying is that this level 5 leadership, it seems like it's something that we touch. And it's like you said, it's a question of how long you're spending there. It's not something that everyone all the time spends. How many level 5 leaders permanently do you know? You know what I'm saying? Because you get a guy who comes to work and he's kicking ass and he goes home and his wife runs all over him. You know what I mean? And I'm talking about kicking ass in a positive way. You know what I mean? But then he gets home and his kids are ruling him, or something like that. Or he's secretly an alcoholic or something.
Yeah, we're complex people, right?
Yeah.
For sure. And no leader is perfect. But one of the things, like, for example, if we use Martin Luther King,
Sure.
Martin Luther King was somebody who had a very clear purpose.
Yes.
And he was not self-protective. Right.
Okay.
In fact, he was what I would call value creating. He was willing to put himself, his own well-being on the line to fulfill that purpose.
Sure.
So let me give you a few other examples.
Let me ask you about that as well. Okay, so one of the problems when someone is like a level 5 leader, how do you deal with when you're acting, as far as you know, in a level 5 manner, and yet your actions are not interpreted by others as a level 5 action? They're interpreted more as a level 3 action. You're doing this because of what you get out of it. And you're like, no, dude, I'm doing this because I want to benefit you. And how do you work through that as a leader?
Well, I think that's one of the inherent challenges, right? But when you have, let's just say we have a level 5 leader, a level 5 leader speaks a very different language than level 4 and level 3 leaders. And of course, if we've got 85% of leaders that operate at level 4, that means that the level 5 leader has to figure out a way to kind of reach and connect with those level 4 leaders. So I think a really great example of a level 5 leader here is Alan Mulally at Ford. So he's the former CEO of Ford. He took over Ford back in 2006, where they lost that at the end of that year. They lost $12.7 billion. It was the most money any organization had ever lost in a calendar year. And 3 years later, they were the one American auto manufacturer that didn't need a government buyout. And in 2013, he's recognized as the 3rd best leader in the world. I think it was by Fortune magazine.
Sure.
So this is a really radical transformation that occurred at Ford. And where we find level 5 leaders, we generally find this sort of a transformative effect on the organization. I think Satya Nadella at Microsoft, Ed Catmull at Disney Animation, you could even think about Bob Iger at Disney as being some of these leaders that have had this transformative effect. And in my study of them, again, I'm not going to say that they're perfect leaders, but they seem to spend a high percentage of their time at that mind or that level 5 leader level.
So then let's go to Bob Iger. Why would Bob Iger, if he is a level 5 leader, pick a level 3 leader to succeed him when he picked Bob Chapek?
That's a great question, right? And we see a
because that sounds like maybe a level 3 type decision, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. And we see a similar issue with that at Ford. So Alan Mullally's successor also was not the ideal pick. And in fact, Alan Mulally would agree. I've spoken to him about that. And so
Bob Iger would agree too that he shouldn't have picked Chapek.
Yeah. And so what I've kind of come to learn, of course, I don't know Bob Iger. I haven't had conversations with him and the dynamics that have gone on there. But in the case of Alan Mulally, one of the things that I learned is that Mark Fields was Alan Mullally's successor. And Mark Fields did show moments of that level 5 leadership, and he did show moments of brilliance. But there was also a variety of political factors that Alan Mulally felt were outside of his control. And so I just imagine with Bob Chapek that there was some political factors that were, if you read Bob Iger's book, Ride of a Lifetime, you'll know that Disney's board of directors didn't want him to be CEO really in the first place. And he always kind of struggled with his relationship with the board of directors. I think they ultimately came around to them, and clearly they've brought him back after the Bob Chapek debacle. But I imagine there's some political things that are going on that's influencing did influence that decision.
Sure. So again, we're in the realm of speculation here.
Yep.
Because obviously we don't know. I think what's interesting though, again, is that as human beings, we are incredibly complex. And you make the good point there that it's a matter of percentage. How much time are we able to spend in these higher levels as opposed to at the lower level? You talked earlier about being able to control yourself basically in the moment. What is the relationship between the way you control yourself outside of stress situations and the way you control yourself in stress situations? Yeah. Because it's kind of difficult, right, to practice self-control in a stress situation when you're not actually in that situation.
Yep. Let me ask you this question. Are you familiar with the concept of window of tolerance?
Not exactly. I can speculate, imagine what you're talking about. So give us some details there.
Yeah. So I think window of tolerance is a helpful lens. So this term window of tolerance was coined by a psychiatrist named Daniel Siegel. He's written a great book called Mindsight. And this perspective has become popular in the psychology and the neuroscience world. And I think it's a really helpful frame of reference. So the idea is when we think about our nervous system and the circumstances that we're in, when we are in a circumstance where there's relatively little stress or healthy stress, then our body's nervous system operates at what we would call homeostasis.
Yes.
It's where we're operating at a very regulated level. But as stress increases and pressure increases, that's going to throw our body out of homeostasis, and our nervous system adjusts to try to bring us back into homeostasis. So when that stress and pressure becomes more and more extreme, we get to the breaking point of our window of tolerance, right? And when we get to that breaking point, it's oftentimes talked about as we got triggered, right? And when we get triggered, we largely lose control of our cognitive and emotional sophistication. And so we've all got this window of tolerance where we could be, if the conditions are normal, let's say, we can operate at a high level in terms of our cognitive and emotional sophistication. But the more that gets disruptive, the more we're going to lose control. So when we understand this, one of the things that we need to recognize is that everybody has a different width of their window of tolerance. They have a different capacity for how much stress and pressure that they can take on before they get, to use the term, triggered or sent outside of their window of tolerance.
Yeah.
And so when we do this vertical development work, this is one of the benefits, is we widen our window of tolerance, which effectively is increasing our load carrying capacity.
Yes.
How much stress, how much pressure can we carry without, in a way, freaking out and kind of losing control? So the wider our window of tolerance, our greater ability to stay in this value creation mode despite the stress and pressure around us.
Think about the last time you promoted someone into a leadership role and it failed. Why did it fail? I can tell you one reason. People know how to build projects, but they don't know how to build and lead teams of people. Construction comes with its challenges that only insiders truly understand. Generic leadership training doesn't cut it. You need a program to train your leaders built specifically for construction professionals led by an industry expert. And my online course, The Shift, is exactly that course. It has 5 modules. It'll teach your people how to control their calendars and reduce stress and embrace chaos and accomplish their critical tasks. It will teach them the 3 essential messages they have to communicate every day in order to motivate and lead their team effectively. It'll show them how to build and lead a high-performing team, give them a framework for running effective meetings so they'll be able to solve problems in less than an hour, and also give them a higher perspective on their leadership that will enable them to work on the business and on their teams and not get stuck in the weeds micromanaging. So go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, read all about the course, and then enroll yourself and your leaders in the course, and I guarantee that it will transform your leadership. If it does not, you take the whole course and you didn't get benefit from it, you just send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will cheerfully refund you 100% of your money. I'm really confident this course will transform your leadership. So again, go out to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today.
Okay, so then when you're working with people, let's say I know I'm going into a meeting where the potential for me being triggered, as you say, is high for whatever reason. And I mean, I can journal and meditate as much as I like outside of that situation, but something happens when I get into the situation and you say X and I'm going to do Y and it's not going to go well. How do you coach someone in the moment to be able to control themselves so that they can have that positive level 5 outcome that you're describing?
Yeah, the reality is that doing this vertical development work, it takes time and it takes effort. And the ideal situation is we do that work and effort in advance of these types of circumstances. But inevitably, in our journey of vertically developing, these circumstances are going to pop up. And so this is where kind of developing those metacognitive skills are really helpful, so that we can learn in those moments, okay, I know I normally get triggered in these types of moments. So going into this meeting, I need to coach myself up on, okay, what am I going to do to stay level-headed? Well, when they say this thing or this thing that normally triggers me, I've got to learn to take a few breaths, to ask to step away for a period of time. So there's different, I'm going to call them short-term tactics that we can engage in to better settle and regulate ourselves in those moments.
Okay, so some of those obviously come to mind pretty easily. Take a breath, walk away. Is it as simple as that? It's interesting because you're making a lot of connection between our responses and our nervous system. And so you're not necessarily relating it directly initially to our thinking or our choices, but to our actual nervous system. So, as I'm in the middle of those things, it's interesting though, because some people are reluctant to say, hey, hold on a second, I need a minute, because then, they don't want to look like a pussy or something like that. You know what I mean? Yep. So is that what you're talking about? Literally changing your physical position or walking out of the room temporarily, things like that?
Yeah, this is a different plane, right? We've got to think about what is the quality of, I'm going to call it my physiology, right? My body and how it's currently functioning and operating. And if we could be in greater touch with, I almost feel like in my body, as I get into these heated situations, like I almost feel like I've got this temperature gauge and I can see that red mercury going up that temperature gauge. Like I can feel that internally. So the greater our capacity to sense that within ourselves and then engage in different tactics or strategies to lower that is ultimately going to be what's going to help us to lead in a cognitively and emotionally sophisticated way as opposed to a reactive.
So is this a practical way of demonstrating vulnerability if you're going to say, hey, listen, dude, I need a minute here. I'll be right back, but I need a minute?
I think so. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Right. Because that, to your point, is we almost have this feeling, oh, I might look like a pussy here, or, I'm weak here.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, like, here would be my challenge. If you said that to me, is like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to look weak in this situation.
Right.
My challenge would be to you is try it out.
Yeah.
And let's see if they actually think that you're weak,
Yeah.
or does that actually improve how much they respect you?
Well, it's interesting, though, because when you're in a meeting with people that you know really well, people are looking at you and they're like, yeah, he's about to go. He's about to go. And then again, that you have to be able to, in a certain way, humble yourself if you're going to use a strategy like you're talking about, sort of the walk away for a moment strategy, because it's better to do that before you say something than to say something and then end up storming out of the room anyway, huh?
Yes. Yeah. Spot on.
But it's interesting, right? Because what you're saying here is that one of the ways you deal with these nervous system issues, which many of us feel we don't actually have control over, is by asserting a degree of control over our bodies by implementing a different bodily activity, if you know what I'm saying.
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
So, yeah. And I think that that's a sign when somebody can do that. That's a sign that they're at a higher vertical development altitude, for sure.
Yeah. You have to be willing then not to care about what other people think about you in that moment.
Yeah. And that's right. Because the more that we care about what others think of us, the more we become self-protective.
Right.
And the more we care about our purpose over our self-protective strategies, the more we can be an effective leader.
Awesome. Ryan, I really appreciate you coming on the show today and talking through these concepts. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Ryan today. Hope you enjoyed it. Some good challenging nuggets in there. Use and apply them as you see fit. And if you have to walk out of a meeting for a minute to gather yourself before coming back in with a value-creating solution, feel free to do that. Don't worry about other people judging you. And again, feel free to share this episode with other people who you think would benefit from listening to it. Give us a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit. And always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.